Welcome to another episode of the Distributed Data Show, brought to you by DataStax Academy, where we bring you the latest news and interview technical experts to help you succeed at building large-scale distributed systems.
Hi there. So today, we're going to be talking about MultiCloud. We're going to talk about the what and the why really behind MultiCloud.
Yeah, and also kind of we're going to try to diffuse some of the confusion around it. Because multi-cloud can routinely get mixed in with hybrid cloud, or like maybe what's private cloud? Is that a thing anymore? Like what are all these things that are appended to cloud, right? So multi-cloud, per the definitions that we've been discussing and have found out on the interwebs, is basically two public cloud providers being used at the same time to provide a service or whatever you're doing with those two cloud providers. Whereas hybrid cloud is a cloud provider, could be public or private one. It gets a little fuzzy. Attached to some on-premises, definitely like private cloud something.
Right.
So it's kind of, those are the key differences, but then it gets a little fuzzy even in that sense, right?
Right, because so for one, it sounds like hybrid cloud definitely has that dimension of an on-prem. So we know that for sure. But it sounds like even we could have a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud situation. There's no reason for not. So it does sound like it gets a little bit fuzzy. Yeah,
you could have AWS, GCP, Azure, your data center, your computer under your desk. I mean, who knows? You know, it starts to span out. But there's definitely like that polymorphic, encapsulated, reverse encapsulated situation with those two definitions. But as far as what we're talking about, and going to be talking about for a few episodes, is multi-cloud, as in running a service, a database, etc., across two public providers, like Azure and AWS, for instance. So
hopefully that kind of clears up a little bit of what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of episodes. So we know like kind of the what now. What is multi-cloud? But really why? What do we get with multi-cloud?
It's a very good question. And the obvious reason is that it's the cool thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It does sound cool.
Yeah.
It's very cloudy.
Yeah, so aside from that silliness, the first thing is it gives you the best of all worlds, right? I mean, if AWS is leading in one technology and Azure has some new services around something else, and then Kubernetes does something with GCP, and you want to use all those capabilities, if you go multi-cloud, you've got all of it, right?
Right, exactly.
So
best of all worlds, that totally makes sense. But there must be other elements to it as well, right?
Definitely.
I'm thinking around maybe like protecting against, lock-in,
yeah.
cost.
Which kind of even loops back around to what I just said. Even though you have the best of both worlds, one of the advantages is to maybe not use all the bleeding edge stuff, but to make your systems able to be moved among those clouds. So like if you have AWS stuff running and GCP stuff, and then for some reason you need to offload some from AWS and over to Azure for like, let's say some leverage for pricing concerns or something like that. You have that option then if you're set up to run in a multi-cloud environment.
You're not really putting your eggs all in one basket. You're really protecting yourself against any kind of arbitrary inflated cost on one provider, things like that.
Yeah.
What about, do you think there's any kind of like maybe legal implications, or maybe what would you call it around that area?
I don't know. Lawyers seem to make everything real simple. Yeah, so there's a lot of legal ramifications, especially with GDPR coming out just recently, and other privacy concerns. Like one of the big privacy concerns for a while there was, I believe Germany and the EU had some very strict privacy controls around IP and analytics data being stored. And even if you did have permission to store certain data, it had to physically be located in country. So if you need to store something in country, like say maybe South Korea or Germany or over in Sweden, you want to have a data center location that's in that location that you need. So if one provider doesn't have a location there, but has it somewhere else you need it, but then all of a sudden this other provider has one in, say, like Frankfurt, boom, you need to go multi-cloud to have that dual option between the two data centers.
So I think that kind of stems in perfectly to the other thing that we were discussing, which is really the like kind of a typical architecture that we're kind of seeing around multi-cloud. Is that kind of
Well, typical or not typical, right? Like one of the
right? Yeah.
I mean, from my point of view, I'm like, well, what are people trying to do? What are companies needing to do that is multi-cloud? We see some companies starting to do this, and in some situations, the architecture is pretty straightforward. It's like, I have my copy A, I have my copy B, and that's in this cloud, and this is in that cloud. Boom. And they move forward with that. But then some get a little bit more advanced or have more complex concerns, like maybe one company will use AWS Lambdas in one location, and another company will come in and say, well, we need to have locational proximity to that, but then our stuff is over in Azure. So all of a sudden they're multi-cloud, and really they're just using multiple services between the two cloud providers that are not particularly just copies of each other, but different actual services.
Right, that best of both worlds.
Right.
Yeah, or
yeah,
all
exactly.
worlds.
They get the best of both worlds there.
Right.
So really it's still a very new and kind of fledgling endeavor to get into this multi-cloud space, and there isn't a just standard architecture that we see.
Right.
We see people doing some things that are starting to be a trend, but overall it's still a lot of very disparate types of implementations we see.
Yeah, it's going to start to be interesting to see actually what customers and people
Very
are
much.
actually doing in this space with their architecture.
I can imagine it's going to get crazy
Yeah,
too.
it's going to span, it's for sure.
Yeah.
So there's much more to talk about here for sure. So we're going to have a couple more episodes around multi-cloud.
Yep.
So today we talked about the what and the why, and we talked a little bit about how we kind of imagine people will do this architecture, but we're going to spend the next couple episodes really diving deep into these areas.
Yeah.
And
security, state management, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to be giving our opinions on,
A few of them.
yeah, exactly.
At least 2 or 3.
So be ready. So until next time,
Yep. I'm Adrian.
and I'm Amanda.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us again for the Distributed Data Show. We love your feedback, so go to the Distributed Data Show page on DataStax Academy and tell us what you think. You can also find us on the DataStax Academy YouTube channel, or find our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get great podcasts. While you're there, make sure and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.